Hello friends! We're doing a quick and dirty video today. It is 58 degrees upstairs where I normally film, which is just too cold. So we're filming downstairs. You're gonna get the sound of my dog chewing on her bone. You're gonna get the fish filter in the tank behind me. You're gonna get the heater. It was this or not post a video at all, which is still an option if I listen back to this and go, oh no, this is unacceptably bad. So today I wanted to talk about the Feminist Book Club 2023 Radical Reading Challenge. This was a challenge that I was doing throughout the year of 2023. I have excitedly already started the 2024 version. This was essentially a series of prompts. I didn't even bother to count how many prompts were in here. But I just thought I'd share what last year's prompts were and what I read for them, and maybe tempt you into picking up the 2024 passport and joining me, because it is a lot of fun. So the first page of the passport is where you're supposed to color in each month that you read the official Feminist Book Club book of the month. As you can see from mine, I stopped reading the books in August because I got distracted by other things, so I need to finish last year's books. The wonderful thing about the way that the Feminist Book Club works is that part of your subscription, you get access to their private server in Mighty Networks, and all of the discussion questions are all there. So if you can't make it to the live discussion, you can still participate via the discussion prompts. So it doesn't matter as much if you don't get the book read on time, which is great for me. I have the non-fiction subscription, and sometimes I'm just not in a non-fiction mood. So the first individual prompt is read a book with 150 pages or less. And I just realized that my stack of books on the floor is in reverse order. So we're going to come back to this. We're going to go in reverse order in the passport too, rather than try and flip my list, my stack over. So the last page of the passport is Be a World Traveler. Read 10 books that take place in 10 different countries. So for this one, I read Jonny Appleseed. That is by Joshua Whitehead, and that takes place in Canada. I read The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. That was in India. I read The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, which is by Silvia Moreno Garcia. That one is in Mexico. I read Little Darlings. I don't remember the author's name. That was in the UK. An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good. Again, I don't remember the author's name, but that was a Swedish book. Notes from a Young Black Chef. That one was cheating a little bit because two-thirds of it take place in the United States, but one-third does take place in Nigeria, so I used it. Little Eyes, again, takes place in several locations, but the author is Argentinian. Galaxies and Oceans was in Australia. We Have Always Been Here took place in part in Pakistan, and Before We Say Goodbye was a Japanese novel. Next, bottom of the stack challenge. It says, we know your TBR has grown. Grab that book that's on the bottom of your TBR stack and finally cross that one off your list. So in 2023, the book that had been on my Goodreads TBR the longest was Radium Girls by Kate Moore. I read that one in May, and I gave it 4 stars. And in here I wrote, very dramatic writing style and very vivid accounts of everything going wrong with the dial painters' bodies. Lots of pus and disintegrating bones. Very informative book, though. I stand by that review. If you don't like body horror, do not read that book. It was disgusting and very explicit, but also a really interesting look at the Radium Girls specifically, but also the beginning of like worker protection. Read a book that's meant to make you lol. I read We Are Never Meeting in Real Life by Samantha Irby. I read that one in August. I gave it 3 stars. That's one of her earlier books. I basically picked it up because I was waiting for Quietly Hostile to come in as a library hold. And it did make me laugh, but it wasn't as funny as her later work. So if you've never read anything by Samantha Irby, I recommend starting at the later end of her publishing list. Read a book that was made into a movie or television series. I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. 4 stars. Basically exactly the same as the movie, very creepy. So that's what I wrote when I hadn't seen the movie in years. So it matched exactly what I remembered from the movie, which is not really the same as actually matching the movie. I went back and watched the movie later, and there were some differences, but it's still pretty dang close, which you can't always accomplish with a movie adaptation, so good job, them. Okay, finally one that wasn't a library book. So the prompt was a new to you format challenge, and this one was really hard for me because it says audiobook, graphic novel, ebook, comic. This is your chance to step out of that comfort zone and reach for a different book format. But I already regularly read audiobooks, ebooks, physical books, graphic novels, comics, and manga. So I interpreted this as a manhwa, I think is how you say that. It is a Chinese graphic novel, essentially, or a Chinese comic book. Kind of similar to manga, but I hadn't actually read one from China before. So, this is Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, Volume 1. I had heard excellent things about these books from the internet. I was entertained. The art is stunning. Ooh, not that page. That page was gross. Find a pen. Here we go. There were zombies involved. So I'm not showing you the zombies, but cool art. All of the characters look fairly similar, but they each wear a distinct color. And the beginning of the book gives you like a guide to who's who, so you can remember like which color is which character, because otherwise they're just like all tall, slim men with long black hair. All right, Animal Experience International Challenge. Read a book with an animal on the cover. I read Quietly Hostile by Samantha Irby. It has a skunk on the cover. I don't think that skunk had anything to do with anything in the book, but it was there. It's surprisingly hard to find a book with an animal on the cover that I actually wanted to read. The next prompt was Feeling Hungry. Notes from a Young Black Chef, Kwame Onwuachi. I scribbled out his name several times because apparently I kept misspelling it. So I don't know for sure if I pronounced that correctly, but that one was a memoir by a young Black chef. I picked it up because I like food memoirs, so I had done like a search in Libby for food and memoir available now, and that was one of the ones that came up, and he has very good descriptions of food. It made me very hungry while I was listening to it. I had no idea who he was when I started reading it, but it was good, and now I kind of want his cookbook. Okay, the Perfect Pairing Challenge. So that was pairing a book with a beverage or snack. So I paired Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake. And in here I said, this sapphic romance pairs with a dirty martini or a very dry white wine. Or if you're alcohol free, have a nitro coffee. So we have this like very, very proper sort of character in Astrid. She's very uptight. She is learning to let go and go with the flow, and it is a struggle for her, which is why I said a dirty martini or a very dry white wine, because that is just what I imagine high society women might drink. But also I like a dirty martini. So, as you can see from the bookmark in here, I am actually rereading this one, so I obviously enjoyed the book, or I wouldn't pick it back up again. The next book, by contrast, I did not like at all. This was the Black Cat Bazaar Challenge, and we were supposed to read a book that has a ghost for a main character. So I read Lead Me Astray by Sunday Warner. I did not realize when I picked this book up that it is a Wattpad book, which means that it is self-published, and very clearly no editor has ever gotten their hands on this book. But the main character was a ghost. So, if you want a book that has a ghost as a main character that's actually good, I would highly recommend The Taking of Jake Livingston. I think it's by Ryan Douglas. That book is excellent. Okay, judge a book by its cover. Pick a book with a pretty cover. I picked Fledgling by Octavia Butler, and if you tell me that you don't think that this cover is stunning, I am going to call you a liar, because it is beautiful. I actually got Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents with the covers done by the same artist for my birthday. My wonderful husband bought them for me, and I did very specifically look for the matching set because the covers are so pretty. And the cover on the actual book also very pretty, not just the box the book is in. Read a retelling of a classic story. I used In the Lives of Puppets by T.J. Klune for this one because this is a Pinocchio retelling, and also a truly excellent book that I very much enjoyed reading. If you are expecting the T.J. Klune that wrote The House in the Cerulean Sea and for everything to be like joyful and wonderful, this book is going to upset you. This is a post-apocalyptic story with robots. It is much more sci-fi versus his fantasy fare, but I thought the characters were wonderful. Rambo in particular was a delight. Yeah, a really good retelling of Pinocchio. Okay, the Women Belong in Leadership Challenge. Read a book by a woman in leadership or about a woman in leadership. I read Fascism, A Warning by Madeleine Albright. I feel like being the Secretary of State counts as in leadership. That was a really interesting look at a period of time that I didn't really get to study in school. You know, I kind of make a joke fairly often about none of my history classes made it past World War II. None of my contemporary political science classes started earlier than like 2000, so there's this chunk of time that I know almost nothing about, from like the 50s through the 90s, essentially. So Fascism, A Warning, is looking at fascist leaders, starting with Hitler and Mussolini, and then moving forward from there. So they were mostly people that I did not know anything about. So it was an interesting look at something that I had very little knowledge of, and I do feel like I learned a lot from that one. It was not a fun read, though. Read a feminist book that wasn't written by a cis woman. So I read Transgender History by Susan Stryker. Susan Stryker is a trans woman. And on here I wrote an excellent and inclusive history of transgender people, language, movements in the US, with feminist history sprinkled on top, several references to essays out of women's liberation, so that was fun. Women's liberation was the January pick for the Feminist Book Club. It was essays from second generation, or second wave feminism. And it was really interesting, and Transgender History actually did reference a lot of it because there was a strong split in the feminist movement of the time as to whether trans women should be allowed into women-only spaces. Obviously, the answer is yes, because trans women are women. But as we can see, if we spend too long on Twitter, that's still something that some people are debating. Those people are wrong. Right, next prompt, read a book that was translated. So I read Vita Nostra. This is by a married couple, Marina and Sergei Dyachenko. It was originally written in Ukrainian, and I read a version translated into English. It was weird. If you like dark academia, this is probably going to be your cup of tea. I am still on the fence with dark academia. I honestly don't know if I like it or not. I think my issue with it is that by virtue of what it is, it often features much younger characters, and sometimes I'm just getting annoyed with them being age appropriate. So that's kind of a me issue, but that is kind of what's going on in here. We do have like 18, 19, 20-year-olds. They're in a school where they put forth considerable mental effort to bend the laws of physics. It's not ever really described as magic, but that is essentially what it is. And I believe there is a sequel out now. I don't really feel the need to read it. For me, the ending of this was satisfying, but I have heard that the ending is contentious and not everyone liked it. Alright, read a YA novel. So for that one, I read Tash Hart's Tolstoy. This was one that was, those of you that have watched my recommendation for LGBTQIA2 Spirit series will recognize this. This is one that I read specifically for the asexual book recommendations. I'm not a big YA person. As I just said, with dark academia, I tend to get annoyed with teenagers acting like teenagers. That is not a fault of the books. That is just me and my opinion as a reader, and so I tend not to read much. Basically, my exception to that is Rick Riordan and the Rick Riordan Presents books, because those are wonderful, but mostly not my thing. Yeah, in here I said not at all my usual type of book to pick up. The story was a little over dramatic. Alright, the next prompt was read 5 books by or about women scientists or gender nonconforming scientists. So I have The Disordered Cosmos by Chandra Prescott Weinstein. This is a book on astrophysics. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. This was the nonfiction book club for Jess Owens' pick. Very happy that I read this. if you're into astrophysics, I would recommend picking it up. You know, we can't always and only read Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? The next one that I read was Unwieldy Creatures by Addie Tsai. I have to admit I did not like this one. It is a Frankenstein retelling. I thought that the pacing just didn't work for me. The first 50% of the book is like all flashback. It's very slow. I was not entertained, and then I hated the ending. And again, this is one that people either love the ending or hate it, and in this case, hated it. Next, The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This is about a woman who makes clones, and then she finds out that her husband stole her cloning technology and cloned her to try and make a more perfect, tractable wife. It is deeply creepy. It's all off-screen violence, but it does get very violent. It is a horror, like a domestic horror, domestic thriller novel. I really liked it. But yeah, this is one that'll make you angry. And then I read Eve by Kat Monahan. Y'all have heard me talk about this book several times already. It was in my top 5, probably my favorite nonfiction read for last year. Yeah, really good biology, evolution of women, evolution of mammals, how the female body drove 200 million years of human evolution. There we go, I can just read it off the cover. Really, really like this one. It is about biology and also trans-inclusive, proving that it can be done. But it's also just a fascinating book and clearly very well researched because of this. The last like 200 pages are citations, so it's also not as long as it looks. And my last female scientist, The Black Hole Survival Guide by Jenna Levine. This was one that I read in December. It was okay. It had a hard time remembering if it wanted to be a survival guide and use second person, or if it wanted to just talk about how cool black holes were. And I think that it would have been better if it just stuck to talking about how cool black holes are. But it does have really cool illustrations. Let's see if I can find one. Yeah, stuff like that. They're all black and white. Little pictures. So I liked that part. All right, the next, read a book by a disabled author. I read Hunger Pangs by Joy DeMora. That is an independently published book. It is a paranormal romance and just thoroughly entertaining. Read a book by a deceased author. I'm sure that I read more books than just this one, but for this challenge I used The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I absolutely love it, but this was still a slog for me to get through. It is like reading the Bible, because it is essentially his Bible of Middle-earth, and like complete with, in the beginning, God created, and a list of who begat who. Like, yeah. Some of the stories are really entertaining, but mostly it is very slow-paced. So you have to just, like, really, really want to know the lore. All right, read a book by an Indigenous author. I read Jonny Appleseed by Joshua Whitehead. So this one, he is, oh gosh, I just completely forgot. Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Okay, OG Cree. Yeah, and describes himself as indigiqueer / two-spirit, and so does our main character. The main character in here is a sex worker trying to get enough money to get back to the reservation because his stepfather has passed away. So this book evokes a lot of feelings while you read it, despite its relatively short length. I liked it, but it was a complicated kind of liking. So read a book by an AAPI author, so that is Asian American or Pacific Islander. So for that one I read Ninefox Gambit by Yoon-Ha Lee. I actually read the entire trilogy last year. I really like this trilogy. It is very space opera, using math and a religious calendar to control how physics work, and everyone's like at war. There is a character that is only in the mind of someone else, like only she can hear him. He was implanted in her to help win this war. It's very complicated. You at no point know who to trust and who you can't trust. But I love this series. Highly recommend if you like a space opera. Read a book by a Latinx author. I read The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. I did not like this book. I gave it 2 stars, and the only thing I wrote in here was bored. It was very slow-paced. For something that was supposed to be like a retelling or a reimagining of the island of Dr. Moreau, I expected more like science fiction elements, and instead it was more like novel of manners, romancy. It was a little bit like trying to read like Austen or Bronte, which I don't dislike, but it's not something I reach for often. I like a little bit faster paced books. So for read a book by a Black author, I picked No Gods, No Monsters. My stack is getting short. By Cadwell Turnbull. This is another one that made it into my top 10 fiction of the year. It's really good. I wrote excellent book, super queer, clearly about race, etc., but the metaphors are subtly and beautifully done. I love a political statement subtly and beautifully done instead of punching you in the face with it. And yeah, I think this accomplished that. Read a book by a 2S LGBTQIA author. I read many, but the one I used for this was Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. I read the entire Wayward Children series last year. I absolutely love them. I just ordered the 9th one today. I'm very excited to read it. Maybe tomorrow. I've talked about these books a lot on my channel too. I think at this point you all know what these are. New to you indie bookstore challenge. Read a book that you picked up from a local indie bookshop. So I got Mortal Follies by Alexis Hall from King's Books, which is one of my favorite bookstores in Tacoma. And yeah, I really liked this book. The narrative style worked for me. It is not going to work for everyone because we have a omniscient narrator who inserts themselves into the story frequently. In this case, it is Robin Hobb, aka Puck. So if you are familiar with A Midsummer Night's Dream, you know the character. Yeah, the narrative style is going to be polarizing, but I really enjoyed the story. The idea is that this is like an alternate version of England, and the gods of old are still like around and occasionally interfere. So our main character gets cursed by the goddess Minerva, and she has to like jump through all of these hoops to try and get the curse lifted. Okay, a 2023 highly anticipated release, Lone Women by Victor Laval. I ended up loving this book. What I wrote in here was I heard a lot of hype about this book before it came out, and it deserves all the attention. Again, this is one that made it into my top 10 for 2023, and it is just really excellently and sensitively written. I would not, if you had told me ahead of time, like, that a cishet man could write women this well, I would have been very, very skeptical, but truly, he does an excellent job. My stack over here is getting precarious, but we're almost done. We have 2 books still to go, which is good, because I'm supposed to go out to dinner with my niece, so I gotta get going real quick here. So, the second to last was read a book with 400 pages or more. So I used The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. Again, this was a book that made it into my top 10 favorite books. In here I wrote, very difficult but well worth the effort. This was an amazing story with a very unique writing style. Yes, this writing style switches between like third person and second person and first person. Uses them all. There are only 7 chapters in the entire book. It is a chunky book. Each chapter is 1 day long, and it's following 2 young men going on a journey to try and return a goddess to like her rightful position. It was very difficult to read. It took a lot of like, okay, wait, what? And there's not really easy stopping points, but once I was into it, I was invested in this story. Really, really ended up liking the writing style once I picked up the rhythm of it. So yeah, recommend. And last but not least, read a book with 150 pages or less. Heart Haunt Havoc by Freydis Moon is 149 pages. This is a horror novella, independently published, but beautifully bookish. Bethany recommended it, and I tend to trust her recommendations, and I was not disappointed. Yeah. Maybe it's just I don't know. At this point, I read it at the beginning of the year. I couldn't really tell you what it was specifically that I loved so much about this book. It is a Catholic exorcism story. We have a transgender exorcist, a non-binary person being haunted. It's just very, yeah, it's a delight. And barely made the cutoff. I probably could have used one of the books of poetry that I read last year, but they're not necessarily reliably that short either. So that was it. That was what I used for the Feminist Book Club 2023 book, Radical Reading Passport. Like I said, I've already gotten started on 2024. I've read 1 3/4 books for the prompts. Some of the prompts are repeats, but a lot of them are brand new. So if you are interested in picking up your own passport and joining me on this reading challenge, I will have a link to it in the description. I am not affiliated with. This is not a commercial. I'm not being paid by the Feminist Book Club. I just really enjoy the books that I read with them, and I enjoy the community that is part of the club, and so I wanted to do a little video shout out to them. And yeah, so if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, hit that subscribe button. I hope that the sound quality wasn't too terrible for y'all. It was the best that I could do. I hope you are staying warm out there. Good night.